February 2017. A cage diving boat sits at anchor off Gansbai, on the southern tip of Africa, where the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean grind against each other, and the water turns the color of old bottle glass. The tourists on deck are pulling on wetsuits. They have paid to be lowered into that water inside a steel frame, and they have paid for one reason. This is Gansbai. For 30 years, this stretch of coast has been called the Great White Shark Capital of the world, not as marketing, but as arithmetic. Researchers here counted them by the hundred, season after season. The entire industry was built on a promise, so reliable it had stopped feeling like a promise at all. Drop into this water, and something ancient and enormous will come to look at you. Then, someone on deck points. Two dorsal fins, cutting a slow line across the swell. But not the tall, rigid triangle that's great white. These are bent, folded over sideways, one curving hard to the left, one curving hard to the right, like the masts of a ship that has come through a storm and never quite straightened up. The tourists reach for their cameras. The guides don't. The guides go very quiet because they recognize those fins, and they know what those fins mean. They mean that every great white shark within a mile of this boat has just become the least dangerous animal in the water. Here is the question worth sitting with. Not what are those two animals doing here? Why would the mere shape of a fin be enough to silence a boat full of professionals who work with great white sharks for a living? They had been seen before. The first credible report puts them near Luderitz on the Namibian coast in 2009. Over the following years, they turned up again: Cape Town, False Bay, Port Elizabeth, Gansbai, and they became recognizable for the simplest possible reason. Killer whales are identified in the field by their dorsal fins, the way people are identified by faces. Every fin carries a unique pattern of nicks, scars, and the grey saddle patch behind it. Researchers keep photographic catalogues going back decades. These two didn't need a catalogue. Their fins had collapsed, a rare deformity in which the fin loses rigidity and folds to one side, one folded left, one folded right. A South African whale-watching guide named Dave Hurwitz gave them names taken from the language of ships: port for the left side of a vessel, starboard for the right. The names stuck, and that is a small detail that matters more than it looks. Because once an animal has a name, you can build a timeline around it. You can say, this individual was here on this date. And when you can say that, you can start asking a different kind of question. Not what a species does, but what these two specifically are doing. Killer whales are not rare in South African waters. Several distinct populations move through, and they have been recorded there for as long as anyone has been keeping records. So what made Port and Starboard different? Not where they were. What they were leaving behind. Before this goes further, it's worth correcting something almost everyone gets wrong. An orca is not a whale in the way you're picturing a whale. It is the largest member of the dolphin family, Delphinidae, and everything that follows comes from that fact. An adult male can reach 8 to 9 meters, close to 30 feet, and weigh 6 tons or more. That is roughly a city bus, moving at speed in 3 dimensions. But the size is the least interesting part. Orcas are warm-blooded, which means they run a metabolism at full temperature in cold water and need the calories to pay for it. They hunt in stable, related groups, held together across decades. They produce vocal repertoires so distinct between populations that researchers describe them as dialects, and the behavioral traditions layered on top of those dialects, passed from one generation to the next, are described in the scientific literature as culture. Different orca populations eat completely different things and refuse to eat what the neighboring population lives on. Some specialize in herring, some in seals, some in other whales. These are not different species, they are different traditions. Which raises a question the rest of this story keeps circling back to. If a hunting method can be invented by one animal, what happens next? Because there is no serious debate about where orcas sit. They are the apex predator of every ocean on Earth, not a contender for the position. And the great white shark, the animal that has occupied the top of the human imagination for 50 years, the one that emptied beaches on 3 continents on the strength of a single film, will abandon an entire feeding ground rather than share water with them. Port and Starboard appear to have understood this. What nobody knew in 2017 was how far the two of them intended to take it. The first evidence didn't involve great whites at all, and it didn't come from Gansby. November 2015, False Bay, on the other side of the Cape Peninsula. In the kelp forest at Miller's Point, there is an aggregation site for broad-nosed Sevengill sharks, heavy, ancient-looking animals, apex predators in their own right, reliable enough that dive operators built schedules around them. Then, inside a single day, they were gone. Not thinned out, gone. Alison Koch, a marine biologist who had spent years studying those sharks, began receiving photographs from divers, carcasses on the seafloor, and the carcasses were wrong. Each one had been opened at the pectoral girdle, the point where the side fins anchor into the body, with a single, clean tear. The tissue was folded back. There was almost no other damage. The word researchers kept reaching for was surgical. Not violent, not messy, deliberate and repeated, and identical from one animal to the next. By April 2016, 5 retrievable Sevengill carcasses had been recovered and examined. Every one of them was missing the same thing. And here is the detail that should stop you. The rest of the shark was still there. Think about what that implies. Predators do not leave food. A hungry animal that has just killed something the size of a person does not take one organ and swim away. Leaving that much protein on the seafloor is not what hunger looks like. It's what a preference looks like. Which means somebody wasn't feeding. somebody was selecting. Early February 2017, Port and Starboard are recorded near Gansby. Between February and June of that year, 5 great white sharks washed ashore along that coast. Not juveniles, mature animals from 3.6 to 4.9 meters, 12 to 16 feet. One of them, a female the local operators had known for years and called Khaleesi, came in at close to 16 feet. Every carcass had been opened at the pectoral girdle. Every carcass was missing its liver. Nothing else had been taken. To understand why that specific organ, you have to understand what a shark's liver actually is. In a great white, the liver can account for a quarter to nearly a third of the animal's entire body mass. In a large adult that is well over 100 kilograms of tissue, and it is not ordinary tissue. It is dense with squalene and lipid oils, and it does 3 jobs at once. It regulates buoyancy because sharks have no swim bladder. It fuels migrations that can cross entire ocean basins, and it stores the caloric reserve that carries the animal between kills. Nutritionally per kilogram, it is one of the richest packages of energy in the ocean. So, something had located that organ through skin, muscle, cartilage, and body wall, removed it largely intact, and left several hundred kilograms of the ocean's most famous predator lying on the sand. The team that examined those carcasses was led by Alison Towner, a marine biologist working with the Dyer Island Conservation Trust. Their analysis, published in the African Journal of Marine Science in 2022 under the title "Fear at the Top," laid out what the evidence had been pointing at all along. Port and Starboard were hunting great white sharks systematically, and they were doing it with a method nobody had ever recorded. But knowing that it happened is not the same as knowing how. How do you kill an animal that has spent 50 million years perfecting the business of not being killed? Orcas hunting sharks is not, by itself, new. It has been documented elsewhere in the world, and it looks roughly the way you'd expect. A group of orcas surrounds a shark, harasses it, disorients it, and wears it down over an extended period. Cooperative predation. Attrition. It makes sense, given what a large shark is capable of doing to something that gets it wrong. Port and Starboard don't do that. What researchers assembled, from necropsies, from drone footage, from people on boats who happened to be in exactly the right place, describes something much closer to a procedure. Short, repeatable, almost boring in its efficiency, which is what makes it hard to watch. One orca comes in toward the shark's head on a line that pushes it to turn. The second is already positioned at the flank. Then, one of them takes the shark's pectoral fin in its teeth, the long side fin that gives a great white almost all of its directional control, and rolls the animal onto its back. And something happens that the shark has no answer for. Turn a shark upside down, and it enters a state called tonic immobility. Muscle activity drops, respiration slows, the animal goes rigid and still and stops responding. researchers still argue about what it's for. A stress response, a reflex, possibly something inherited from mating behavior, but nobody argues about the effect. A fully inverted great white shark cannot right itself. For a window of somewhere between 15 seconds and several minutes, an animal weighing over a ton becomes inert, present, alive, and completely unable to act. That window is the whole hunt. One orca holds the shark in position. The other applies pressure at the pectoral girdle, opens the body wall, and extracts the liver. Documented sequences run under 2 minutes. Sit with the scale of that for a second. The great white shark can detect chemical traces in seawater at concentrations approaching parts per billion. It can sense the electrical field of a heartbeat through the ampullae of Lorenzini in its snout. It has been refined by 50 million years of evolution into one of the most complete predators the planet has produced. And it can be switched off, opened, and emptied in the time it takes to boil a kettle. Now hold on to that number, 2 minutes, 2 animals, because it's about to matter. In May 2022, off Mossel Bay, a drone operator captured something no camera had recorded before: the predation itself from the air. Starboard, working alongside several other killer whales, taking a great white shark. Towner and her colleagues published the analysis in the journal Ecological in 2023. For the first time, the sequence wasn't inferred from a carcass, it was on film. That should have been the end of the story. A remarkable hunting method, documented at last, formed by a coordinated group. Then came 18 June 2023. Off Mossel Bay again, observers watched Starboard approach a juvenile great white shark, roughly 2.5 meters long. Alone. No port, no group, no coordination, because there was nobody to coordinate with. In just over 2 minutes, the shark was incapacitated and killed. Starboard then swam past the observer's vessel, carrying a piece of the liver in his mouth, a detail that, depending on your reading, is either an artifact of how orcas handle food or something considerably harder to sit with. The event was published in the African Journal of Marine Science in 2024. Solo predation on a white shark by a killer whale had never been recorded, anywhere, in any population, in the entire history of the field. So the technique had not simply been learned, it had been refined to the point where one of them no longer needed the other. Which forces the obvious question, and it isn't rhetorical. If it only takes one, what stops it from spreading? While researchers were working out the mechanics, something much larger had already happened in plain sight for years. The great white sharks of False Bay were gone. This is one of the most significant white shark aggregation sites ever studied. Seal Island, in the middle of that bay, produced the breaching predation footage that defined an entire genre of wildlife filmmaking. Researchers there had catalogued hundreds of individual sharks. Cage diving and research operations ran on the assumption that the sharks would be there because they always had been. By 2019, sightings had fallen essentially to zero. Not reduced, zero. At first, nobody agreed on why. Overfishing was blamed. So were the shark nets along the KwaZulu-Natal coast and shifting prey distributions and long-term environmental change. All of these are real pressures, and all of them were on the table. The debate was genuine, and it was not resolved. Then a second data set arrived from the other side of the world. At the Farallon Islands, 30 kilometers off San Francisco, ecologist Salvador Jorgensen and colleagues had been tracking white sharks for years. The Farallones are a critical autumn feeding ground. Elephant seal colonies, high-calorie prey, sharks returning on schedule season after season. The team had acoustic tag data on 165 individual sharks and nearly 3 decades of predation surveys. What they found, published in scientific reports in 2019, was blunt. When killer whales entered the area, the sharks left. In the best documented case, in 2009, every one of 17 tagged white sharks had cleared the island within about 8 hours of the orca's arrival. They did not come back that season. Most of them were not detected there again until the following year. Read that again. These sharks abandoned the richest feeding ground available to them at the peak of the feeding season and stayed away for close to 12 months because killer whales passed through. Not attacked, not hunted. Passed through. So the South African pattern fits a global one. Sharks leave when orcas appear. Except it doesn't quite fit, and the part that doesn't fit is the strangest thing in this story. Other killer whales had moved through False Bay before. Different individuals, same species, same waters, same time of year. The sharks stayed. With Port and Starboard, the sharks left and kept leaving. The correlation between these two animals' presence and white shark absence held across years and across sites. So what is it about these two specifically that the sharks are responding to? The leading hypothesis is chemical. Marine mammals shed a continuous signature into the water: skin cells, waste, secretions. And that signature can persist and drift long after the animal has gone. It is entirely plausible that white sharks are reading not killer whale, but something far more specific in that chemical trace. Which would mean the sharks aren't fleeing a category. They're fleeing an identity. And whatever that signal carries, it overrides everything a large predator is otherwise built to obey. Hunger, site fidelity, seasonal timing, the pullback toward waters an animal has returned to for its entire adult life. All of it cancelled by two individuals. Remove the apex predator from a system, and the system does not simply hold its breath. Something moves into the space. In False Bay, copper sharks, bronze whalers, expanded into water the white sharks had vacated. They are fast, large, capable animals, but they operate on a different ecological tier. In an intact system, the presence of great whites constrains where they go, how they aggregate, how bold they are. That constraint was gone. So the copper sharks came inshore, in numbers, in places people noticed. Then Port and Starboard started killing those too. And on the 24th February 2023, off Pearly Beach, at least 17 broad-nosed Sevengill sharks were killed in a single day. Everyone opened at the pectoral girdle, everyone missing only its liver. 17 apex predators, one day, 2 animals. Which is where the ecology stops being tidy. The great whites gone. The Sevengills being taken in numbers that no population model was built to absorb. Copper sharks filling a vacuum and becoming prey inside it. Seal populations released from a pressure that had shaped their behavior for generations, with consequences moving down through the fish stocks below them that nobody has finished mapping. How far does a change like that travel before it stops? Nobody knows yet. That's not a dramatic pause. That's the actual state of the science. And then there is the observation that changes the shape of everything above. Port and Starboard may no longer be the only ones. Researchers in South African waters have reported other killer whales exhibiting the same targeting of sharks, the same entry point, the same organ, the same carcass left behind. The data is early. Everyone working on it is careful about how strongly they state it, and they are right to be, because the alternative explanation that these are simply animals from the same social circle who learned it directly is not ruled out. But recall what orcas are. Behavior transmits socially in this species. Calves learn from their mothers. Techniques spread through pods. There are documented cases of an innovation appearing in one animal and propagating through a population within a few seasons. Culture, in the technical sense, is one of the defining features of the animal, which reframes what happened off Gansby. If Port and Starboard developed this method or were the first to perform it where anyone was watching, then they aren't just two unusual predators. They may be the origin point of a tradition. And a tradition is not a local event. A tradition travels. Go back to that boat. February 2017. The tourists with their cameras up. The guides who stopped talking. They weren't watching a predator encounter. They were watching the opening of a documented ecological shift. And they were watching it be caused not by a species, not by a population, not by a pod, but by two individual animals with names. Two animals worked out how to hunt the ocean's most mythologized predator. They refined the method until one of them could do it alone in under 2 minutes, and they performed it consistently enough that an entire regional population of great white sharks changed its behavior in response and largely has not come back. For 50 years, the great white shark has been the ocean's designated monster, the apex, the thing at the top, the image so deeply set in cultural memory that it became shorthand for the sea itself being dangerous. Port and Starboard were never operating inside that story. To them, the great white was a calorie-dense, accessible prey item with a predictable vulnerability, and once you know the technique, not especially difficult to exploit. What marine biologists are left holding is a question that does not yet have a clean answer. Is this a local anomaly? Two unusual individuals? One coastline, one moment? Or is it the leading edge of something larger? A shift in how killer whales globally come to regard sharks as food. The researchers are watching. The data is still coming in. As of the most recent published work, Port and Starboard are still out there, still working the South African coast, and the great whites, for the most part, are still gone. You started this with a fixed idea of what sits at the top of the ocean. 50 million years of evolution. Rows of replaceable teeth. The animal that made a generation afraid of the water. Now you know that off the coast of South Africa, two orcas with bent dorsal fins treated that animal as a reliable food source, found its liver through muscle and cartilage and body wall, took it in under 2 minutes, and did it often enough and thoroughly enough that the sharks stopped coming back. Not because of climate, not because of overfishing, not because the ocean changed. Because two specific animals worked something out. Which leaves one last thing to consider, and it is the only part of this that is genuinely open. The ocean does not have a permanent hierarchy. It only has a current one. And somewhere out there right now, it is being revised.